Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. We are looking at yarn swatches at the moment, and today I'm going to show you the yarn swatches I've been making of the different stitch patterns I want to create knitting designs with. Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. So when you have lots of yarn sitting around and you have a feeling you want to knit something with it, it is a good idea to knit up a swatch with it just to see whether it works in the particular stitch pattern. So that's what I do when I create new patterns. I test it out first. I create little stitch swatches just to see how the pattern works in a different yarn. And then sometimes I might change the stitch, I might change the stitch count, I may do different things with it just to see how it works. So I'm going to show you those yarn swatches now. Now this is ideal if you are doing the yarn declutter. Go and sign up for the yarn declutter if you're not there already. I've got the link in the description below. And go and see the yarn declutter live videos that we're doing every Tuesday at the moment in April. Okay, let's see those yarn swatches. Okay, so last week you may have been here watching me organise all these different gauge squares for the different yarns, how many stitches to cast on, how many rows to knit, etc, etc. And all of this was in stocking stitch. And what we have here, it's just very simple squares. But what do I do if I'm testing out yarns and I'm figuring out how I want to create a pattern? Well, what I do then is I knit up yarns in different ways, and then I get an idea of how it will finish out into a larger piece. So for example, recently I've been looking at some DK weight yarns and just wanted to see how they feel when I'm knitting with them. So that's the Rowan Cotton Glacé. This takes a slightly smaller needle. It's a 3.25 millimeter needle, and this is suggested a 3.75 millimeter needle. I was knitting both of these up with 4 millimeter needles just to see how they would end up. So what we have here, gauge that I just started to experiment with. I thought, what does it look like in moss stitch? What does it look like in stocking stitch? And of course, when you reverse it, I can see what reverse stocking stitch looks like. And all of this also gave me a good idea of how I liked knitting with it or not. The feel of the yarn in my fingers, the feel of the fabric once it's finished. This one is a lot softer. This one, it's made with combed cotton. So it's just got that slightly different manufacturing process that makes it feel very, very summery actually. So there's, it's almost string-like, if you kind of get what I mean. If you've handled a lot of cotton yarn, you'll know what I mean. So this one I would probably use more for accessories or for one of those crocheted summer jumpers with lots of holes in it. That would feel kind of right. This one feels softer, so it feels like it's something I'd be more happy to wear next to my skin, and I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't knitted with them. So, and I've got the fabric sitting here telling me how it feels, reminding me which one I want to knit with further. So I'm really happy with these squares. As you can see, I added quite a lot of moss stitch to the top of each one just to give me an idea, just to help me think, do I want to use moss stitch when I'm knitting with this? Just different textures. How do different textures feel as I'm knitting with these yarns? Okay, so that's those two. And what did I do? I did exactly as I did last week, making up these little charts, but I just gave myself that little bit more room. It wasn't 10 centimeters with only a little bit extra. It was quite a bit more extra, just to see how it would knit up over more stitches. So that's those two. This is one that you might get a bit excited about. I've been practicing just seeing how it will work if I use cotton yarn for intarsia. It does work quite well. It's not brilliant, but I think it's pretty good, especially for home items. It's not something you're going to wear every day, so it might fall out of place, but I really, really like this. So I just wanted to test it. I wanted to see what it would look like. And I'm, like I said, I'm really happy with it. I get to see what it looks like on the back, how easy it was to weave and strand across the back of this as I was knitting. What does the moss stitch look like on the other side? that looks pretty good. I'm quite happy with it. And with a thicker cotton yarn, sometimes intarsia doesn't quite work so well with thicker yarn. There's a little bit of grey poking through here because I've stranded, but if you're not stranding it, if you're doing a true intarsia, then that wouldn't work, that wouldn't show. But I'm really quite happy with it. So I had to do this, I wanted to do this just to test it out. Even just seeing whether those colours work together. Yes, they do. They look really good. They happen to be the Pantone colours of the year. It's just one of the things that I noticed this year. I love knitting with these two colours. That makes so much sense that it's colour of the year. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I will do before I'm knitting up a pattern. Now, some of you may even have knitted this. It was very popular in the shop last year. It is the Butterfly Cowl. So it's got little butterfly stitches in it, and you can actually go and find the butterfly stitch tutorial on the YouTube channel. It's right here. So there you go, lots of little butterflies all over it, but I wanted to test it. I actually tested it with much thicker yarn to start with, so I'm just getting an idea of whether it was easy to knit, whether I liked knitting it, because I'm not going to sit here and knit a cowl or suggest that you knit a cowl if it's a real bother and make mistakes all over the place. So this Butterfly Cowl knitted up really well with a much thicker yarn first. Then I tested it with this thinner yarn. And you'll see here that I tested it in quite a few different ways. I wasn't so worried about it rolling at the sides because obviously it's a circular knit, so that wasn't a bother for me. But what I did do first was test it, like I say, first of all, without any bits at the side. But that meant that the whole thing was rolling, and I thought I can't even look at part of it to see whether it will work. But there was just a tiny bit of garter stitch at the top and nothing at the sides. So I just testing that out, and I was leaving a space stitch in between the butterflies. I was seeing whether that would work, whether they needed to be next to each other, and that was okay, but I wasn't that happy with it. And then I thought, right, we'll give myself a little bit extra on the sides and see how that knits up. That was better. But the garter stitch at the top and the bottom was still rolling. It wasn't because the sides were rolling as well that it was just encouraged. So I thought, how can I keep that stable? And of course, this is what's ended up being part of the pattern, is we have a rib at the top and the bottom, and that feels so much better. I've got the stitch count here, moved over to this. I've got a little extra on the garter stitch sides so I can just see it flat, and it's nothing like this. But then that's what has moved into the final piece. And of course, I then knitted up cuffs as well to match. So using this, all these gauges, giving me an idea. It's not just, oh, throw some ideas on a piece of paper and then knit it. When I'm creating patterns, it is really, really helpful to just knit up all of these swatches. And this is what I've been doing in the last couple of months, because I'm creating patterns for the summer that will appear in June. And you'll find these and think, oh, I remember that from Hannah's tutorial on YouTube. She was showing us how she made the swatches. So, does that feel like it might be something you need to do? If you come up with quite a few balls of yarn in your yarn stash and you want to see whether it will work for a particular knitting pattern, then trying out the stitch pattern first. Just seeing how it will knit up, either in stocking stitch and garter stitch, in a particular stitch like the butterfly stitch maybe that I showed you in that little video there, then maybe that is the way to go before you knit the whole thing. Before you start putting, I don't know, maybe 400 stitches on your needle and knitting 10 rows to only decide that you don't want to bother. Why not put 30 stitches on your needle and then see how it goes? Then you'll realise whether it's worth it or not. So when I'm designing patterns, that's certainly something that I will do. There are quite a few stages behind creating a knitting pattern. So if you want to look at that in greater depth as well, then do go and have a look at the Pattern Writing Made Easy course. I created that last year for you as a lot of you were asking about writing your own knitting patterns, so do go and have a look at that. I've got the link in the description for that as well. So there you are. That's how I knit up yarn swatches, but next week I will actually be knitting a yarn swatch with you. Now this is ideal for creating gauge swatches. The gauge swatch is a fancy term for knitting up a square and seeing whether the number of stitches in 10 centimetres and the number of rows in 10 centimetres matches up to what the pattern suggests it should be. Most knitting patterns, well, a lot of knitting patterns where the item is particularly fitted or has to be a particular size, will give you a gauge size, a number of rows and a number of stitches per 10 centimetres. And you won't know whether that will work for you, whether you have a looser knit or a tighter knit, until you knit up a swatch, or indeed you start knitting the actual item. So it is a good idea, and it's also a good idea if you are going through your yarn declutter, like I said, to just knit up a swatch, see how it feels, see whether you like knitting with it. And you can use your swatch for all sorts of things, as a teapot stand or a coaster. Use it, if it's a cotton or a bamboo, as a dishcloth. Do join me again for that next week. We'll be talking more about yarn swatches. I'll be with you again on Tuesday for another Yarn Declutter Live. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next week. Bye for now. Happy knitting.